Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're at. Thank you for joining us today for this update to home health survey changes, some insights and impacts to our providers. We really appreciate you all being here today. Carrie is going to take over telling you all about this. Just to let you know, we do have the Q&A open, so if you have any questions, please type them in there, and we will have time for those questions at the end. Also, just to let you know, the slides will be available to everyone in a file format in the chat at the end of the presentation, and a recording of the webinar will also be available at the end on the registration page. Thank you all, and go ahead and take it over, Carrie.
All right, thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to 2024 Home Health Survey Changes webinar. My name is Carrie, and I'm the educator here at CHAP, and I will be walking you through the Appendix B changes this afternoon, or this morning, if you're like me, still on the West Coast time zone over here. So our learning objectives for this webinar include understanding the why behind the updates to Appendix B, what those revisions include, and what they mean to organizations. We'll break down the types of surveys conducted and what the process includes for each survey type. And lastly, dive into the revised survey protocols and interpretive guidelines and how these revisions impact home health organizations. So first, we're going to look at some background data that supports revisions to Appendix B and why the revisions were necessary. So since the major overhaul of the home health conditions of participation back in 2018, CMS has published several final rules that have amended the regulations, which you can see are listed here on the slide. We'll go into specific detail of each rule on the following slides as it pertains to Appendix B and the conditions of participation. And because these revisions required an update to Appendix B, CMS also took the opportunity to revise the survey protocol, interpretive guidance, as well as G-tags. And in looking at these final rules, we'll focus on the key areas that impacted the COPs requiring revisions. So the first final rule here made some revisions to discharge planning. And the first revision includes promoting the exchange of patient information between healthcare settings and ensuring that a patient's healthcare information follows them after discharge. CMS included a new discharge planning requirement that requires agencies to assist patients, their families, or the patient's representative in selecting a post-acute care provider. And thirdly, the rule states that agencies must send all necessary medical information to the receiving facility or healthcare practitioner to ensure the safe and effective transition of care. Looking at the second final rule here, we see the inclusion of physician assistants, nurse practitioners, and clinical nurse specialists as individuals who can certify the need for home health services and order services. This also allows home health plan of care to be established and periodically reviewed by a physician, NP, CNS, or PA. And there were several amendments made to the COPs to include the verbiage related to physician or allowed practitioner. And lastly, this final rule also allows payment and face-to-face encounters by allowed practitioners as well. The third final rule here specifically references telecommunications and OASIS test transmission. And CMS finalized that any provision of remote patient monitoring or other services furnished via a telecommunications system must be included on the plan of care and cannot substitute for a home visit that's ordered. This rule also finalized the removal of the requirement at 484.45 for home health agencies to successfully transmit test data to the key system or the CMS OASIS contractor. And this is more important to those organizations seeking initial Medicare certification. It also made some additional amendments to the COPs to include that physician or allowed practitioner verbiage. And then lastly, this rule finalized the 14-day aid supervisory visit, allowing one virtual supervisory visit per patient per 60-day episode. It also finalized the supervisory requirement for non-skilled patients, and the semi-annual on-site visit was modified to require that this visit is conducted on each patient the aid is providing services for rather than a patient. And finally, allowing occupational therapists to conduct that initial and comprehensive assessment process. So all of these revisions you will see embedded in the revised Appendix B as we move through it. So next, we're going to take a look into what revisions were made to Appendix B and summarize those changes. So Appendix B was revised and posted initially by CMS on March 15th of this year. It combines the Home Health Agency survey protocol and interpretive guidelines into one document, updates the level 1 tags, and makes some clarifications and technical corrections to other guidance areas. There was about a month there where there was some clarification that was being made, and that final version was issued on April 12th, 2024, and I have provided that link to the most revised version here for you. So taking a look at this summary of updates, so the revised Appendix B, first of all, retires CMS memos that are no longer applicable or have been incorporated into the revised Appendix B. It adds survey protocols for home health agencies to Part 1 of the appendix and replaces older CMS memos that are being retired. It revised the level 1 standard so that surveyors must assess during a standard survey, and added 3 emergency preparedness tags and 2 infection control tags to level 1 standards. CMS is no longer identifying specific level 2 standards. Instead, when noncompliance with a level 1 is identified, all remaining standards within that relevant COP are evaluated. The revisions revised tags to reflect updated regulatory language based on final rules and adds interpretive guidance, consolidates tags to remove redundancy, and adds survey procedures to multiple tags throughout the COPs there to assist surveyors in assessing compliance. And then adds a cross-reference to Appendix Z, and that is specific to emergency preparedness tags. And then lastly, makes multiple technical and formatting revisions. As a result of the revisions to Appendix B, CMS updated the home health surveyor training, and this training is available to the public and can be found on CMS's Quality, Safety, and Education portal, otherwise known as the QSEP website, and I've provided a link directly for you here. Now, CMS requires that surveyors must successfully complete the basic training course and pass the post-test with a score of 80% or better before they can serve on a home health survey team. And here is an overview of the training that was revised and posted on May 6th of this year. And the link here will take you directly to the home health training. So we've covered the summary of revisions to Appendix B and the required training for surveyors. Now let's look into the types of surveys and survey protocols you can expect to see. So first, let's define the purpose of the survey. The purpose of the survey is to assess the agency's ability to impact positive patient outcomes, evaluate the agency's ability to implement regulatory requirements, and to ensure home health services are being provided. And more specifically, is quality patient care being provided? So here we focus on the initial certification survey and recertification survey process. So the initial certification survey is conducted when an agency seeks to participate in the Medicare program as a home health organization. State agencies or accrediting organizations with CMS deeming authority may conduct that initial certification survey, and all COPs are reviewed for compliance during the initial certification survey process. Before that initial certification can be conducted, the prospective agency must obtain Medicare Administrative Contractor or MAC approval of the application for enrollment, and that's the 855A form. They also must meet the following criteria, and that includes providing skilled nursing and at least one other therapeutic service, provided care to a minimum of 10 skilled patients that received care, not required to be Medicare beneficiaries, and at least 7 of those 10 patients should be receiving skilled care at the time of the initial certification survey. The recertification survey is conducted no later than 36 months after the last day of the previous standard survey. Those surveys begin as a standard survey, but may, as needed, be converted to a partial extended or an extended survey. And those organizations that are accredited by a CMS approved program of a national accrediting organization, They are allowed to be exempt from routine surveys by state agencies to determine compliance with the COPs if they apply for deemed status. These deemed status agencies may be subject to validation surveys authorized by CMS as a component of CMS's oversight of the accrediting organization's deeming program. Another type of survey is the change of ownership survey, or you might have heard it referred to as a CHOW. So agencies that undergo a change in majority ownership by sale within 3 years of the effective date of its initial Medicare enrollment, or within 3 years of its most recent change in majority ownership, must enroll in the Medicare program as a new provider, unless they are qualified for an exception that could apply. So therefore, that means that the agency must undergo an initial certification survey by the state agency or an accrediting organization to ensure that that newly sold agency is compliant with the COPs. And those regulations regarding what those exceptions may include are I've linked that here for your reference if you'd like to take a look at those. So here is where we see our first major change in survey process. So CMS has identified a select number of standards called Level 1 standards that most closely relate to the agency's ability to deliver quality patient care and services as required under the COPs. The standard survey focuses on those level 1s and utilizes information from clinical record reviews, home visits, and patient and staff interviews. A partial extended survey is conducted when noncompliance is found in any level 1 standard. So as I mentioned, CMS no longer identifies specific level 2 standards, but instead all remaining standards within the COP that contains a level 1 standard deficiency are evaluated and a determination must be made as to the compliance with the condition. When a standard or partial extended survey reveals substandard care, the surveyor must extend the survey to review all 15 COPs. And the last one here, the abbreviated standard survey, this is a highly focused survey that evaluates an agency's compliance with specific standards within a COP or the COP itself, as determined by the reason or purpose of the survey. Now, types of abbreviated standard surveys could include a complaint survey, which is an investigation conducted to take a look at specific allegations of noncompliance, or a post-survey revisit, otherwise known as a follow-up. And that's when a condition level deficiency is identified, requires an on-site post-revisit survey to determine if the organization has corrected those deficiencies. So during the standard survey process, the surveyor addresses select standards to review in 9 of the 15 COPs. There are 2 new COPs that were added here to level 1s, and that are emergency preparedness and infection control, and 1 COP that was removed, and that is compliance with federal, state, and local law and reg. Here is a table that shows the conditions of participation along with their associated level 1 standards that will be reviewed during the standard survey process. You can find this table on page 8 of Appendix B from the link I provided to you earlier. And they have added and removed tags with this revised process, so it's really important to familiarize yourself with the new level 1 tags and the standard content for each one. I wanted just to point out the new level 1 standards as a result of those 2 new COPs that are included in the review process. So here's a look at the new level 1 standards for infection control, and they include G682, which is that the home health agency must follow accepted standards of practice, including the use of standard precautions. And G686, that the agency must provide infection control education to staff, patients, and caregivers. And taking a look at the new level 1s for emergency preparedness, we have 3 of them here. So E0004 is that the agency must develop and maintain an emergency preparedness plan. 0013 focuses on the development and implementation of policies and procedures. And 0036 is that the agency must develop and maintain an emergency preparedness training and testing program. So before we move into the survey tasks, let's look at how CMS defines the different types of deficiencies. So number one, deficiency is defined as a violation of the Act and regulations contained in Part 484, subparts A through C. And this is determined as part of a survey and can be either standard or condition level. Standard level deficiency is defined as non-compliance with one or more of the standards that make up each condition of participation for home health agencies. And lastly, a condition level deficiency is defined as non-compliance with the conditions of participation or conditions for coverage where the deficiencies are of such character as to substantially limit the provider's capacity to furnish adequate care or which adversely affect the health and safety of patients. The manner and degree of the non-compliance determines if a condition level deficiency is warranted, and we're going to talk about that in just a couple of minutes. So there are also specific compliance definitions. So substantial compliance is defined as compliance with all condition level requirements as determined by CMS or the state. Non-compliance is defined as any deficiency at the condition level or at standard level. And substandard care refers to non-compliance with one or more conditions of participation identified on a standard survey, including deficiencies which could result in actual or potential harm to patients of an organization. We've talked about now the purpose of the survey, the types of surveys that are conducted, and defined deficiencies and compliance. Now we're going to move into the specific survey tasks and the revised process for surveyors. So here is a list of the survey tasks and what you can expect when that surveyor walks through your door. On the subsequent slides, we will break down each task in more detail. But as a revised process here, there are now 7 tasks instead of 6. They added the survey sample selection task, and they made slight changes to task 5 and task 7. So here we have pre-survey preparation, followed by the entrance conference, then survey sample selection and the information gathering task phase. Then it moves into the preliminary decision-making and analysis of findings, followed by the exit conference, and then lastly, post-survey activities. So the objectives of the pre-survey preparation task are to review historical information about the organization that may assist in identifying areas of potential concern during the survey and to establish the plan. So the primary pre-survey activities include reviewing background information about the organization, generating and printing OASIS reports, and printing surveyor worksheets. In preparation for the survey or resurvey, the surveyor will review specific documents listed here with the intent that this background information will assist in determining the composition of the survey team and the time that may be required for the survey to be completed. During the pre-survey preparation, 4 reports are downloaded for surveyor review, and that includes the potentially avoidable event report and patient listing report, the agency patient-related characteristics report, as well as the error summary by agency. And these specific reports contain information that may assist the surveyor in identifying potential areas of concern that may need to be emphasized during the survey process to help focus the survey, as well as identifying potential patients for the survey sample. Specifically in relation to the error summary report, this was an area CMS clarified in the final version of Appendix B to indicate that if an agency shows a pattern of multiple assessments, not just one, but a pattern with an error on this report, surveyors should investigate compliance with G372, which is the encoding and transmission of OASIS data. And then lastly is a listing of worksheets the surveyor will print for survey. The objectives of the entrance conference are to inform the agency administrator or their designee of the survey activities that will take place and request specific information that will be needed to conduct the survey. So upon entrance, the survey team will present identification and introduce themselves, explain the purpose of the survey, and provide an estimated survey duration, basically how many number of days they'll be on site. For all surveys, the survey team will request assistance to obtain a private space for them to be able to work, location of the copier, how that's going to be operated, a staff person who will be a resource to the surveyors and be able to obtain information for them, and those staff that are most knowledgeable about clinical supervision, aid supervision, and in-service training, as well as orientation to the organization's clinical record system. For a standard survey, they're also going to request the number of unduplicated skilled care admissions in the last 12 months, a list of your current active skilled patients for all payer sources, your schedule of home visits that week, as well as a complete list of all discharged patients from the last 6 months. Now, when an extended survey is conducted, they may request additional information such as home health aide training, competency evaluations, in-service training, specifically information about alternate administrator, as well as a governing body approval and appointment, CLIA waiver. Also could ask for a quality program activities, performance improvement projects, infection control plan, as well as the emergency preparedness plan. So to alleviate some of that stress and assist your organization in being prepared, here is a list of quote unquote survey binder items that you can keep current in order to help you be prepared when that surveyor walks in your door. So an organizational chart is very helpful. Of course, your unduplicated admissions, your active patients, your discharged patients of the last 6 months, that current visit schedule, a list of your employees that would include direct as well as contracted staff, the scope of services that your organization provides, as well as a state licensure, if applicable by your state, policies and procedures, a sample admission packet for the surveyor to review, as well as your current contracts, and those IKEYS reports we mentioned, as well as a complaint log. So the survey sample selection task, the objective of this is really to select a case mix stratified patient sample that represents the range of skilled services provided. Case mix means that the sample contains a range of admitting diagnoses, and stratified means the sample includes patients who receive a variety of skilled services. The sample then consists of both closed and active patients for all payer sources. Documents and information that's utilized for sample selection include that list of unduplicated admissions that you provided, your complete census of all your active skilled patients, a list of patients that may be receiving clinically complex services or treatments, your home visit schedule during that survey, as well as a list of all discharged patients in the last 6 months prior to survey, and that a potentially avoidable event report and agency patient-related characteristics report. Here is the table that is used to determine the minimum sample size for your closed record review, active patient home visits with record review, as well as active patient record review only. And the sample may be expanded per surveyor discretion at any point in time during the survey as needed to further investigate findings. So as mentioned, the PAE report should be utilized for closed record reviews. If there are no patients listed on that report, the surveyor will use the discharge list as well as your complaint log. And the closed clinical record review is a review of agency services and patient care outcomes from admission through the discharge process, and will also evaluate whether the discharge and transfer summaries were completed as required per 484-110 under clinical records, and also evaluate the agency's compliance with the 60-day recertification of care requirement. You can find this table in that Appendix B under page 14. Surveyors may conduct home visits to any patient who have given permission for the surveyor to directly observe care and services being provided. It's important to note that the surveyor selects the patients according to the sample criteria and not the organization. The home visit sample should represent a variety of services that the agency is providing. And in that selection, they will look at patients who are receiving more than one service to assess for coordination of care amongst the disciplines, patients from all branches in addition to the parent location, if applicable, patients who are receiving clinically complex services or treatment, so for example, infusions, wound care, anticoagulant therapy, diabetic management, CHF, et cetera, or therapy modalities such as ultrasound and electrical muscle stimulation. The information gathering task, this is an organized, systematic, and consistent process that's designed to assist surveyors in making findings concerning the home health agency's compliance with the COPs throughout the process. Surveyors are gathering information by focusing on home visit observations, interviews, and clinical record reviews. They assess for compliance with the Level 1 standards to determine if patient outcomes were negatively influenced by non-compliance with the COPs. The findings then determine whether the survey is elevated to a partial extended or extended survey, as well as identifying possible areas for further investigation. And surveyors will validate any findings with additional document review and/or interviews as needed. Let's look at those 3 key tasks in a little more detail. The home visit is the only opportunity for the surveyor to be able to observe direct patient care that's being provided by agency staff, and as a result is the most important means of information gathering during the survey. So the objectives of the home visit. So during that home visit, the surveyor is going to be evaluating whether or not the care being provided meets the health and safety standards of the Medicare program. They will also evaluate and confirm that the agency is following the patient's plan of care. In planning the home visit, agencies should be contacting the patient, family, or caregiver to request permission for the surveyor to observe. Clinical records should be reviewed prior to and after the home visit. And for the home visit, provide the surveyor with a current plan of care, medication list, and aid assignment sheet if it's applicable to that visit. During the home visit, surveyors should be courteous and respectful and sensitive to the patient's clinical status. They should explain the purpose of the visit, that the visit is voluntary. They should ask patient or caregiver to sign the home visit consent form. They will observe the care that the staff are providing and may request permission to review the patient's information packet. In conducting patient interviews, surveyors may ask questions during patient care. They do have the ability to end the interview or home visit if necessary. They may attempt to address any potential concerns of the patient and be alert to signals from the patient. And if needed, they may be able to remain if the opportunity presents itself after the staff leave to further follow up with the patient and/or family. During the clinical record review process, the surveyors will verify that the documentation is accurate and complete and reflects the care and services being provided. They will review the record to address any concerns for noncompliance that was identified during the home visit and further evaluate the requirements of Level 1 standards included in the standard survey. Lastly, with those staff interviews, these are informal interviews that are conducted throughout the survey process. The depth of interviews and how many staff they will actually interview is determined by the issues identified. And they will only interview staff as necessary to address concerns that may have been identified. So when surveyors identify concerns that indicate actual or potential findings of noncompliance, they may review additional documentation to assist them in making a compliance determination. Non-clinical record materials listed here are not routinely reviewed unless the surveyor identifies concerns during staff interviews, patient caregiver interviews, home visits, and/or clinical record reviews. If the surveyor has any questions or concerns based on the home visit observations, the staff that was observed may also be interviewed following the home visit. Additionally, if the surveyor may conduct additional record review and staff interviews as necessary to investigate findings. If the patient or caregiver reports having lodged a complaint with the organization, the surveyor may review the complaint log and investigate how the organization addressed the issue. During the survey, if a surveyor finds that services are being provided from an unapproved location that's not listed on the 1572, they will investigate this location to determine if indeed it is a CMS approved branch. In addition to home health services, some Medicare certified organizations choose to offer non-skilled services through various Medicaid state programs. And if a Medicare certified organization is providing skilled care services to non-Medicare beneficiaries under a Medicaid waiver or a state plan, the agency must meet all COPs for these beneficiaries, including the comprehensive assessment and OASIS data reporting requirements. So the general objectives of the preliminary decision-making and analysis of findings tasks are to integrate the findings, review and analyze all information collected from observations, interviews, and record reviews, and to determine whether the organization is in compliance with the COPs. There are two components to this task. One is guidance for citing standard versus condition level noncompliance, and two is guidance for level 1 standards and survey type. The first component is related to citing standard versus condition level. When noncompliance with a particular standard within the COP is noted, the determination of whether the lack of compliance is at the standard or condition level depends upon the nature of the noncompliance. For example, how serious is the deficiency in terms of its potential or actual harm to patients? And also the extent of noncompliance. So for example, how many different regulatory requirements within a COP are being cited for noncompliance, or how widespread was a given noncompliant practice. One particular instance of noncompliance with a standard that poses a threat to patient health and safety, that is enough to find condition level compliance. And in addition, when an organization has multiple standard level deficiencies in one COP, the extent of the noncompliance could be enough to find condition level noncompliance. The regulations state that the decision as to whether there is compliance with a particular requirement, condition of participation, or condition for coverage depends upon the manner and degree to which the provider satisfies the various standards within each condition. When deficiencies are found during a survey, the surveyor should explain the noncompliance to the provider during the exit conference. However, it's important to note that CMS stresses the importance of the surveyor role as a representative of a regulatory agency, and it is not their responsibility to provide consultation on how to fix the deficiencies. The second component of the preliminary decision-making and analysis of findings task is guidance related to level 1s and survey types. So during that standard survey process, surveyors are reviewing those level 1 standards only. Because those level 1 standards are identified as those most closely related to the delivery of high-quality patient care, a single finding may support a determination of noncompliance and warrant the move to a partial extended survey. The partial extended survey may be conducted at any time at the discretion of CMS, the accrediting organization, or the state agency, but must be conducted when a level 1 finding indicates that a condition may be out of compliance. So during that partial extended survey, all standards, again, within that COP that contains one or more level 1 standards are evaluated. If the surveyor determines that noncompliance exists at the condition level during their partial extended survey process, the survey then advances to an extended survey, so a review of all conditions of participation can take place. An extended survey may be conducted at any time, again, at the discretion of CMS, the state agency, or the accrediting organization, but will always be conducted when substandard care is identified during a survey, which we defined earlier. An organization with noncompliance to the point of substandard care may find themselves in an immediate jeopardy situation, which we could spend another hour on by itself. So here we're just going to define what that means, as well as those key components they're looking for. So immediate jeopardy is defined as a situation in which the provider's noncompliance with one or more conditions of participation has caused, could cause serious injury, harm, impairment, or death. And three key components that are essential for the surveyors to be using in determining whether or not there is an IJ situation include, first, noncompliance, meaning an entity has failed to meet one or more federal health, safety, and/or quality regulations, and serious adverse outcome or likely serious adverse outcome, meaning that as a result of the identified noncompliance, serious injury, harm, impairment, or death has occurred, is occurring, or is likely to occur to one or more identified recipients of risk. And lastly, the need for immediate action, meaning the noncompliance creates a need for immediate corrective action by the provider to prevent serious injury, harm, impairment, or death from occurring or recurring. So if the surveyor identifies or suspects an immediate jeopardy situation, they must immediately follow the guidelines in State Operations Manual Appendix Q, which I've linked here. And as noted in Appendix Q, if an IJ is identified, surveyors must notify the administrator that an IJ has been identified and follow the process outlined in Appendix Q. The purpose of the exit conference is to inform the staff of the observations and preliminary findings of the survey. Because of ongoing dialogue between the surveyors and leadership during the survey, there should be few instances where the organization is not aware of the findings prior to the exit. So during the exit, the surveyor will conduct the exit conference with the administrator, clinical managers, and any other staff that are invited to join. Describe the regulatory requirements that the agency is not meeting and the preliminary findings that substantiate these deficiencies. Present findings regarding citations of deficient practice in a straightforward, understandable way. Answer any questions regarding the findings. Respond to any agency procedural questions and inform the agency that the 2567 will be provided in accordance with state agency's policy, but generally no later than 10 working days after the exit conference. And leadership should have a conversation with all staff about those preliminary outcome results of the survey for transparency purposes, and then also to help get them ready for implementation of that plan of correction. And lastly, the post-survey activity tasks, and the general objective of this task is to complete the survey and certification requirements. Each state agency and CMS location must follow the instructions in the state operations manual regarding this process. So they must follow the instructions related to timelines for completing each step of the process, their responsibilities for completing the 2567, which is that statement of deficiencies and plan of correction form. Follow instructions related to notification of the agency regarding their survey results, as well as any additional survey activities that may be required based on their results. And then lastly, follow instructions related to compilation of the documents for their file. Now, the Statement of Deficiencies Report and Plan of Correction Form, that 2567, is the official document that communicates the determination of compliance or non-compliance with federal requirements. Also, it is the form that the organization will use to submit their plan of a correction to achieve compliance. So for more information related to preparation of that plan of correction and the process here, you can refer to Chapter 2, which I've linked for you here. Now, in this last section, we're going to focus on the changes to the interpretive guidelines and the impact the revisions to Appendix B has had on your organization. So these next several slides, they're going to focus on specific changes that were made to the interpretive guidelines. The National Association of Home Care, or NAHC, they compiled a wonderful table. That's a great resource that outlines the changes, and I've linked that resource here for you. We will move through these rather quickly so we can cover all of the conditions and their corresponding interpretive guideline changes. So firstly, here under 484.1 for basis and scope, the guidance here establishes the conditions that an agency must meet to participate in the Medicare program, and that the scope is the survey activities for the purpose of determining whether an agency meets the requirements for participation in the program. Also includes some additional interpretive guidelines. Under 484.2, this is specific to definitions and adding all of these following terms in Appendix B that are now used throughout Appendix B. That is all now added to the definition section here. For 484.45, this is specific to reporting OASIS information. The guidance now includes reference to using the OASIS as the standard core assessment data set. It clarifies OASIS reporting regulations that are not applicable to patients receiving personal care only services, and recommends agencies keep copies of their validation reports for at least 12 months. Under 484.50, this is patient rights. The guidance includes that patients should be aware of their rights and how to exercise them, that agencies must inform patients of their rights and protect and promote the exercise of their rights. Specific to the standard related to investigation of complaints, the guidance references that entities and individuals should follow existing mandatory reporting requirements in your state, in addition to any applicable federal requirements. Under 484.55, for comprehensive assessment of patients, the guidance here describes the importance of the comprehensive assessment. And under the initial assessment visit standard, adds that regulatory language addressing that an occupational therapist may complete that initial assessment when OT is ordered with another qualifying rehabilitation therapy service, either speech or physical therapy, that is establishing the program eligibility. Under 484.55, for the completion of the comprehensive assessment standard, this guidance restates that nursing is to conduct the comprehensive assessment when nursing is ordered. And under the content of the comprehensive assessment, this one I thought was pretty important, clarifying that the RNs no longer must review the medication profile on therapy-only cases, that there is no specific discipline identified as exclusively able to perform the medication review. Under 484.58 for discharge planning, it defines the goal for discharge planning and discusses the data on quality and resource use measures that are available to assist consumers in making informed decisions about their care. Under 484.58 for the discharge or transfer summary content standard, this specifically references 484.110A6, and that is specific to discharge and transfer summary requirements. And what that standard is stating is that those discharge summaries typically contain admit and discharge dates, the physician responsible for the home health plan, the reason for admission to home health, types of services that were provided, frequency of those services, any laboratory data that's important, medications the patient is on at the time of discharge, and their outcomes and meeting goals, and any post-discharge instruction. This standard was split in two parts to comply with requests for additional clinical information, and now has its own G tag. Under 484.60 for care planning, the plan of care guidance emphasizes the importance that a detailed, individualized plan is critical to both the quality and safety of patient care. It clarifies the requirement for handling of missed visits. It removes the definition of pertinent diagnosis as all known diagnoses and does define pertinent diagnoses, and then clarifies that required supplies and equipment should be listed, and that there are other physicians who may also be providing orders other than the responsible physician. Under 484.65, this is your QAPI condition. Related to program data, the guidance now expands on the requirement for initial applicants and must have a QAPI program in place and must be able to describe how it's functioning, including which indicators are being tracked, at what intervals, and how that information is going to be used by the agency. For program activities, it emphasizes that the agency must track all adverse patient events to determine whether or not they were results of errors that should have been or could have been prevented. And for executive responsibilities, it emphasizes the role of the governing body and their overall responsibility as they relate to the quality program. For infection control, this focuses on the unique challenges that the home setting presents and the importance of having a comprehensive and effective infection control program. So for prevention, the guidance identifies sources for infection control standards, as well as references the CDC's 6 core practices for infection control in healthcare. Under the control standard, the guidance suggests agencies have a way to receive alerts from the CDC so they can stay up to date with information related to health incidents, and clarifies the education requirement that the regulation does not specify the form or content of education regarding infection prevention and control. The organization must consider the individualized plan of care and the specific needs of the patient. For skilled professional services, under the supervision of professional assistants, the guidance references qualifications for an RN, as well as adding medical social worker requirement that has at least 1 year of experience in healthcare. For 484.80, this is all related to home health aid services. The guidance clarifies under qualifications of the aid, it clarifies the 24-month lapse and defines compensation. Also related to content and duration of classroom training, clarifies that other alternative formats for classroom training are indeed acceptable for that training, but they must provide an interactive component. And specifically for competency evaluation of the aids, this adds the pseudo patient and conditions for when a pseudo patient may be used. And that pseudo-patient definition is defined as a person who is trained to participate in a role-play situation or a computer-based mannequin device. The pseudo-patient must be capable of responding to and interacting with the home health aide trainee and must be similar in characteristics to the primary patient population served. So there are some very specific requirements there in order to qualify as a pseudo-patient scenario. As it relates to in-service training, the guidance adds that agencies may use in-service education through another organization if it is under the supervision of an RN. For qualifications for instructors, include some guidance for those qualifications, as well as to indicate that physicians can be considered those that may help with the training as well for aides. And then eligible training and competency evaluation organizations. This standard reinforces exclusions for performing training and competency evaluations by the organizations and clarifies that if an agency is precluded from performing training and competency evaluations, an outside contractor may use the agency's facility to train and evaluate the aides. As it relates to their assignments, I think this is another important one, clarifies that when both nursing and therapy services are involved, either skilled professional may assign home health aides and develop those written patient care instructions, and further discusses expectations of the IDT and emphasizes the role the home health aide plays as part of that IDT. For supervision of the aides, there was some added regulation that we talked about earlier that allowing for that two-way audio-visual communication technology to be used, as well as that on-site semi-annual requirement, and eliminating guidance that the skilled nurse makes a supervisory visit when nursing and therapy is ordered. Now that is either nursing or therapy can complete that supervisory component. For 484-100, this is compliance with federal, state, and local law and reg. There is guidance here that refers to Appendix C of the State Operations Manual for laboratory requirements. For emergency preparedness, there is reference to Appendix Z for those regulations and interpretive guidance. And for 484-105, Oregon Administration of Services, there is specific detail now provided on the responsibilities of the governing body and further defines individuals that make up that governing body. For the administrator, there is more emphasis now on the responsibility of the administrator, as well as the fact that the administrator is appointed by and reports to the governing body. They did eliminate the definition for the term report to and have placed greater emphasis on the pre-designation, so that alternate administrator or designee. For services furnished, they provide resources for accepted standards of practice. And as it relates to outpatient therapy, the guidance clarifies that in general, this is for situations where a patient would be coming to the agency for outpatient therapy services. And lastly, as it relates to clinical records, the guidance emphasizes the agency must use the information contained in each medical record to assure that safe care is being delivered. And for protection of records, the guidance does reiterate the need to comply with 160 and 164, which are specific to HIPAA privacy and security rules. Lastly, there are 9 COPs that include language stating that the manner and degree of noncompliance identified in relation to the standard level tags for the COPs listed here may result in substantial noncompliance with this COP, requiring citation at the condition level. Meaning how significant the noncompliance is with the standards within these conditions will directly impact whether a condition level deficiency is warranted. Note that 3 of the 9 listed here are not COPs that are routinely reviewed during a standard survey unless further investigation is necessary. So to summarize, how do these revisions impact your organization? Become familiar with those level 1 standards and the standard content of each. This will inform you on what the state and or federal surveyor will focus on during the standard survey process. Develop audit processes with a focus on these standards to ensure your organization is in compliance. Understand the protocols for a standard survey and when the survey could move beyond. Remember, the standard survey focuses on the level 1 standards and utilizes information from those record reviews, home visits, and interviews. So prepare your staff for their role in the survey and with an emphasis on the home visit component as again, this is the only opportunity for the surveyor to observe direct care. Review survey procedures to gain an understanding regarding how surveyors will be assessing compliance with the regulations. As mentioned, their primary method for obtaining information is through those record reviews, home visits, and interviews, and only if needed, additional documentation may be reviewed as well as follow-up from home visits. Review the additions and changes to the interpretive guidelines to prep for survey. We went through these changes rather quickly this afternoon, so spend some additional time familiarizing yourself with those changes and how the surveyors will be interpreting the standards during survey. And lastly, remember that these survey protocols are specific to the CMS state survey process. So if you are a deemed organization accredited by CHAP, all COPs and their corresponding standards are evaluated equally as part of the site visit process. As we wrap up, I wanted to briefly mention the revised Chapter 10 of the State Operations Manual that was posted by CMS on May 6th, as this process does tie into the survey process we just discussed. The informal dispute resolution or IDR process is not new for home health and has been in place since 2012. However, the revisions provide procedures regarding the IDR process and include guidance for state agencies and CMS survey locations on recommending and imposing alternative sanctions. So if a home health organization is not in compliance with the Medicare conditions, CMS may impose an alternative sanction or enforcement remedy. Under this rule, CMS has the authority to impose alternative sanctions such as civil monetary penalties, directed in-service training, directed plans of correction, suspension of payment for new admissions, and temporary management of on-home health programs found to have condition level deficiencies. So with this in mind, it stresses the importance of organizations to be prepared for survey and have a solid understanding of the COPs with a focus on those level 1 standards. This will aid in demonstrating compliance during the survey process and to avoid the risk of imposed sanctions. One last thing to mention, accredited organizations are not authorized to impose these sanctions or remedies. So therefore, agencies that are participating in Medicare through deemed status are not directly subject to these sanctions or remedies by the accrediting organization while they're under their jurisdiction. However, the CMS location may, after reviewing the accrediting organization's survey findings, authorize the state agency to conduct a focused validation survey to determine whether those condition level deficiencies have been corrected. If deemed status is withdrawn or the home health agency is placed under the jurisdiction of the state agency, CMS location may impose and could impose alternative sanctions or remedies on the agency per their usual procedures. And I've also linked the Chapter 10 of revisions here that was just posted there on May 3rd. Okay, so time for questions.
Hey, Carrie, there are a few questions in here. There was a question regarding whether you could clarify that an RN does not need to review the med profile anymore for a therapy-only patient.
Sure. So yeah, in the interpretive guidance, they provided some clarification that the RN is no longer required in those therapy-only cases to review that medication list. That the regulations state that RNs, physical therapists, occupational therapists, as well as speech therapists are all able to conduct that comprehensive assessment component, and that there may be certain organizations that have policies and procedures on how they want that process to flow. So some organizations may choose to still have RNs reviewing medications on a therapy-only case, but is no longer required that the RN is completing that component as part of the comprehensive assessment process. So therapy can indeed conduct that. And if there is a need, they can pull in nursing, of course, at any time point to review, but the regulations are no longer requiring that nursing component have that oversight of the med profile on those therapy-only cases.
Thank you. There's another question here with regards to some instructions that were received for home health aides that they have to perform peri-care on a real person, not on a mannequin. Do you have any insight on that?
I have not heard that specifically, but again, I would urge you to go to the section in the Appendix B where it specifically talks about that. After the definition of a pseudopatient, it goes into some more detail regarding that process. So I would encourage you to go review that in the Appendix Appendix B, but I'm not aware of that particular task having to be performed on or couldn't be performed on a pseudopatient. But again, there may be some additional guidance there in that section that references that pseudopatient process.
Okay, one more here with regards to training records. So the question is, what is the best way to present training records to surveyors to make life easier? We've been hearing about stricter requirements for these documents. What needs to be there, the course name, time, completion, certificates, that type of thing?
That's a good question. And you know what I've noted lately is organizations have different methods now that they are performing those trainings. So whether it's through a online learning system process or in person, those are going to be tracked differently. If it's an online process, you may be able to print a transcript of those individuals that have completed certain training, what the training was about, maybe a brief overview, the date of completion. Paper records are going to be a little bit different. So I would say, and it's going to vary organization to organization, and surveyors will look at it a little different too, just subjectively. But as long as you can present some type of document or transcript that will include the just the overall type of training, the title, maybe a brief description of what was presented during that training, the names of the individuals that attended, and the dates of those in-services, that should be sufficient. But how you do that is going to be very much up to your organization.
Great. Not sure you'll have any insight on this one, but there's a question regarding whether or not we think there'll be any additional reimbursement coming for the use of telecommunications or monitoring technology.
Yeah, that one I'm not sure on. I really don't have any further insight into that, whether or not CMS will make that determination or not.
Okay, last question here. Are the new compliance program standards part of the new revisions?
I'm sorry, which compliance standards are you referring to?
Well, the question, I believe this person is referring to our new compliance program standards.
Our CHAP standards. Oh, okay. So no, those would be CHAP specific. What we covered today was specific to the state CMS process in terms of survey process, as well as those requirements under Appendix B. If you are a CHAP accredited organization, yes, as of June 1st, those compliance standards went into effect with an implementation in terms of being evaluated and cited for non-compliance with those standards would be effective August 1st. So again, those are specific to CHAP accredited organizations, not specific to the state CMS revisions we discussed today.
Thank you, Carrie. Do we have one more slide?
Yes, I'm so sorry. You're right. Would you like me? Oh, I'm sorry. This is a resource list. You will be getting these slides, Denise, right after this webinar is complete. They will be posted to the registration page. And here's a list of all resources that I utilize throughout this webinar. And then lastly, just wanted to share with you all our operations certifications that are coming up. We have several. We have home care operations and home health back-to-back in Sarasota, Florida, coming up here in just a week or two. And then we have hospice operations certification in San Antonio, Texas, later June, as well as an additional home care operations opportunity in New Jersey later August. So wanted to just make you aware of this. And this link here will take you to the webpage where you can get more information and also have a code there you can use to receive $50 off of your registration for that. Did I miss anything, Denise?
Nope, that's it. We are at our time. So thanks for everyone for attending today. And Carrie, thank you so much for putting together this great information. We will get the recording updated. You will receive an email when it's been uploaded, and we will also add the slides as Carrie mentioned. They will be in a file attached to the chat for this webinar, so you'll find them there. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your work week and your day.
Thanks, everyone.